Hey everyone, and welcome. This is Dawn, and I'm here for another of the videos in the series of videos that I'm doing to explore the 7 core teachings of Yeshua from the Sacred Partnership Path book and journey in terms of the broader applications of those 7 core teachings for our journey to full life thriving, to have life and have it to the full, which is why, of course, we are here in this life. And so in these videos, I'm looking at these core teachings with a new, through a new lens. And this is something that I was strongly guided to do, guess starting around it may have been almost a year ago, so I'm a little slow getting these out. But here we are with number 3 of the core teaching. So today we're going to be taking a look at that 3rd core teaching, which is all about radiant expansion. What does that mean? And how is it a key to the radical reclamation and radiant realization of who we are individually and collectively? So that's the topic for today. And we're going to be exploring how radiant expansion is pertinent to all who are committed to a new way, a whole new way of wholeness, walking in the way of wholeness, as we talked about in the 2nd video, and that Trinitarian path that we talked about in the 1st video. All of those of us who are committed to moving forward and embracing a whole new way of seeing ourselves in the world around us, a whole new way of being ourselves, and a whole new way of freeing ourselves. And essentially, this is about a return to the light and the life and the love that we are at our core, both individually and collectively. Everything is always working on those 2 levels. So today we're going to take a look at these broader applications of radiant expansion. And in particular, I was given sort of a fresh new, a fresh new approach to this core content that is available in the book. You can find that. I'll put the links below just to save us time. So you can find that either in the online journey, or you can download the PDF from my Gumroad site, or you can find it on Amazon. So in this video, we're looking at, excuse me for a second, a bug that's flying around. In this video, we're looking at that 3rd core teaching. And so let's start by zooming out a bit from the way that I looked at that in the book, which is, really going to be helpful to you if you take a look at that as well. But we're going to zoom out a bit, and we're going to look at this topic of radiant expansion and how it opens up these vital points of connection to life and life to the full, or the life more abundant. And this is really, I'm going to start actually by giving you the context of when I first asked these questions, which was back, I believe, in 2016. And so my question, for this particular chapter, what became this chapter on radiant expansion, was, how do we have a strong union with another, a sacred union with another, without getting lost in terms of our own wholeness or losing our own connection. And the reason for me asking that, of course, is that I have had that experience, or had at that point had that experience within the context of partnerships and marriage, and also within the context of deeper relationships with friends or family members, and to some degree with I experienced that disconnection when I would come in contact with the person who at that point I considered to be my divine partner. And so he still is who he is, I still am who I am, but I have opened up to new potentialities, which is in some ways what this topic is all about. I'll have to excuse my voice. It's been like this for a few days, and the end of August took a toll on me. So I had to rest up a bit, and I was doing some pretty heavy work there that did include some vocalization just in my own space. But so my voice is what it is. Hopefully it lasts through this video. So the question that started all this was like, how can we have this strong partnership, this strong sacred union with another, and not get so caught up in that we lose ground in terms of our own walking in the way of wholeness, and that journey back to sacred wholeness that I wrote about in my memoir way back in '99, and then that I talk about in terms of the twin journeys. We're always making those two journeys, the journey back to sacred wholeness, that radical reclamation, and that journey to soulful transformation, the radiant realization of who we are. So the question began like that in 2016, and straight away Jesus said, even the questions that I was asking and that others bring forward in terms of this creating a better world, creating stronger partnerships, creating even a better life for ourselves. So he was saying even the questions begin with worry. And he was inviting us, and this is in the book if you want to read precisely kind of how it came through, but he was inviting us to see that so often our very approach to creating and sustaining something that is true and lasting and strong, our very approach often places a limitation, a ceiling, if you will, or a cap on potential growth. And so rather than maintaining a narrow focus on a predetermined path toward a one-dimensional outcome that is fixed, he suggests that we begin with a wider worldview, which in fact is what this series of videos I'm doing is all about. Anyway, so that's perfect. So the core idea here that is in the book, and the answers that were provided to that particular question with regard to sacred union and sacred partnership, the first overarching concept there, or invitation to life that Yeshua provided, and that is going to be the container for everything we'll discuss today, is that we need to start, or we're invited to start, by placing ourselves in the context of a field of grace. So this is something that I have talked about often, and I certainly have experienced grace in my life, and I speak about it often, the grace of God, or the grace of this life, being held in an infinite grace. And yet, when I read this again, when I was preparing, taking just some quick notes in preparation for this video, I was like, what does that really mean? Field of grace. How do we start by placing ourselves in a field of grace? And so I looked up the definition of the word grace, and the first thing I saw was that grace is simple elegance or refinement of movement, as in she moved through the water with effortless grace. I love this, simple elegance. We used to use that phrase a lot when I was married, and we used to talk about simply elegant, and that was what we were going for. And there is this beauty, this purity, this innocence that I often talk about, that is only accessible when we enter into a state of grace. So that simple elegance that is, for me anyway, aligned with nature and all that is organic or natural. It can't be faked, in other words. One cannot fake being simply elegant. And this idea of the refinement of movement was really helpful to me because it was so correlated to the images. I often see things in images, and to the images that Yeshua gave me in terms of this broader context for this teaching on radiant expansion. I'll get to that in just a moment. So think for a moment about the refinement of your movement through the world, and in particular the idea of fluidity, and that image of she moved through the water with effortless grace. I'm not a good swimmer, so it doesn't help to picture myself, but we've all seen such beauty, or a dancer on a stage, a ballet, or so there are many images that come to mind. So think of that idea of the refinement of movement. And refinement itself is a beautiful word, isn't it? To make fine again. We are meant to experience the finer things of life, the finer gifts of life, to have life and have it to the full. Okay, so this field of grace is the first, large principle that pertains to this teaching and the broader applications of it in terms of life thriving, individually and collectively. So we're going to talk about both of those as well. So let's go back to the fluidity piece, because the first image that I was shown here was this image of being in the flow of life. Again, back to that river of life I've talked about recently in a video that I did. And specifically, Yeshua said these words, which I don't think this is in the book, but it may be. He said, solid bonds are forged from fluid circumstance and fluidity. So that's really quite fascinating, when you think about that, because we are conditioned to believe, and we have just kind of become accustomed to this idea that for something to be solid, it must be solid, fixed, definitive. A path must be set. And yet there's very much in this idea of the context of a field of grace and this fluidity and the refinement of movement. There's this dual idea going on here in terms of, simply elegant and allowing for that flow and a kind of a responsiveness. Going back to the video I did on what the 3 characteristics will be needed as we move ahead: responsibility, the ability to respond; adaptability, the ability to adapt; and oh my goodness, third one, it's the one I have trouble with. Yes, relatability, the ability to relate. So those 3, and those themselves, I was seeing those 3 qualities as well as a kind of in this sort of dance together. And so this idea of fluid movement and gentle responsiveness rather than reactions is really central in this field of grace that we're invited to exist within, and then to bring everything to the surface within the field of grace. So what was missing there, as I was shown it, is that we weren't beginning with the context of the field of grace. Rather, we were beginning with, some point at which we wanted to arrive, a destination, an outcome, an experience, a higher, an elevation of what we are currently experiencing, all of which is wonderful. But when we simply look at sort of that linear point A, get to point B, and we're looking at the, we want the straight line, don't we? We want the rapid straight line, and the invitation here is to always be held in that sphere of infinite grace, in the field of grace, and to focus on refinement of movement and being simply elegant. So the second image I was given was an image of the movement of particles, and this sort of experience of natural attraction and a joining together of various particles to create that solid bond, or new composition, or a new element, or don't know all the words, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. And to know that is a magnetic certainty when we release all resistance, when we place ourselves in that field of grace, when we open up to the refinement of movement in our day-to-day lives and in the ways that we are choosing to respond to whatever life or relationships present. So those 2 images in particular were really helpful. The other image I was given was a float tank. Now, I've never been in a float tank, so I had to look up what happens. And in a float tank, there are no lights. There's a lightless environment. It's soundproof. So there's no light, no sound, and it's no gravity, and so you're floating, and obviously floating, and your experience, the way your body feels, is altered. And usually the tank is partially filled with salt water, and then it's heated to the temperature of your skin. And so there's this sort of like homeostasis that occurs. And that's another kind of image I was given, was that when we focus, and I'm going to get to this in a sec, how do we do this? But when we focus here and place ourselves within the context of that field of grace, then we are able to focus on the feeling that has to do with this fluidity, this refinement of movement, this simple elegance, and becoming one with the being in a state of grace. So there becomes a merging with the field of grace. We ourselves are a part of that field of grace. We exist within it, and we are emanating from it, and we are also mirroring and radiating to it. So it's a dynamic process. And again, back to the fluidity. So homeostasis is the tendency toward a relatively stable equilibrium between interdependent elements, especially as maintained by physiological processes. So this state, this homeostasis, is created when we enter into that field of grace, and when we acclimate ourselves to moving through life within that context. And then any questions that arise, they arise within the field of grace, rather than, sort of like the questions themselves that I was initially asking were, or many of them were, from out here, looking out there, whether at another individual or at a situation, or my understanding of what the end goal was. Although I always knew it was much more than a person. Those of you who follow me for a while know I've always been much more focused on the mission portion, and my understanding of that being, in my case, a joint mission. And I have really grown and evolved in terms of my understanding of that. But back to this field of grace. So the context for everything we're going to talk about is this simple elegance within this field of grace that leads to a sort of homeostasis and creates the opportunity for natural and radiant expansion from within, and an optimal functioning within that field of grace. So see, all of that needs to be aligned and activated within us before we can move through the realignments I'm going to discuss today that will be the kind of the how-to of radiant expansion. So what I was shown was that this optimal functioning is the primary focus, but that as we focus on that and then existing within this field of grace, we are naturally connected to these 5 true touch points that I'm going to discuss. And then when we realign to these 5, when we are in a state of alignment with the field of grace and with our natural state as a creator being, as a sovereign being, as someone walking in the way of wholeness on the way, and as someone who has an understanding of that Trinitarian path, those first 2 of the 7 core teachings, then we are able to connect to these 5 true touch points, and they light up, basically like a star map, which I'll discuss in a little while. And these 5 points light up, and then the whole thing, kind of grows and quickly collapses. And then from that rapid collapse comes like a sort of a mini Big Bang, right? And that's where the radiance comes from. So like from that point of singularity that comes from the collapse, then there is the radiance, and that expands rapidly through the energy of love that is who we are. And the way that the conditions for that to be able to happen, that radiant expansion to occur, happens because that love that is the substrate of all creation and the core of who we are, individually and collectively, that love is able to be in that state of perpetual recreation through that infinity loop, when we are existing in that field of grace, when we are giving our attention to these realignments that I'll discuss. And so it's kind of a beautiful, so this visual I was given, I don't know that I can put it in words. Hopefully that's conveying to you. So it's like a mini Big Bang, right? Like it's, and this is when we are in that state of optimal functioning within the field of grace. And this is what produces the state of radiance and radiant expansion, the natural experience of radiant expansion, life and life to the full, to include the fuller experience within all relationships. So these 5 true touch points are realignments, as I mentioned, and they must occur in order for us to experience that life more abundant. And that experience of the life to the full can happen in our individual day-to-day lives, and in the context of relationship with any and all others, and then through the realization of a new society. So the 5 realignments, let's get into those. The first realignment, or true touch point, or the realignment that leads to the true touch point, is to start with the present. The idea here is that radiant expansion only begins in the moment of the now, the present. Most of us are familiar with this, and it resonates, and so it seems like a no-brainer in many ways. But in terms of our experience in our day-to-day life and in relationship and in society at large, we can perceive outside of us a lopsided love. So in other words, something that seems imbalanced in the outer environment in society at large. Certainly, I think anyone on any of the myriad of sides that there are can see that there's definitely imbalances, right? And yet, that experience of seeing this lopsided love only results from 2 things. One is not residing in that state of grace, in the field of grace to begin with, and rather just putting our attention on the outer circumstance. And the second is that we are seeing this because it's a result of our doing one of 2 things. The lopsidedness is like a seesaw within us, those polar opposites at play within us. And so we are either often reliving the past, or our perception of the past, or what could have been, or what might have been, or what actually we think was, which sometimes is real and sometimes is illusion. But in all cases, it creates a pattern that results in a lopsided view, or a distortion, or a perversion at times, but a distortion would be the better word in most cases. A distortion in the energetic pattern, so that what you see out there is a projection of the fact that you are imbalanced in here. And so reliving the past is the one side of that seesaw, and the other is moving into predictive forecasting only, so a focus on the future, or being locked into a particular view of the ideal future state. Now, this is not to say that it's not great to have a vision and to work toward a future state that you desire, and nor is it saying that you shouldn't treasure the memories you have made along the way, or even evaluate the past. Rather, it's saying that there must be a balance between these 2, and ultimately a moving to the center fulcrum. And at that center fulcrum, we begin with the moment of now. And some of you have heard me say NOW is an acronym that I like to use for our next opportunity window is now. And Jesus was saying here that the fullness of time, so it's a term that's used in the Bible a lot, but the fullness of time, the idea of that is that the fullness can only come in the moment of the now. It's actually not, as it's usually interpreted, an idea of a delay, a delayed gratification. Instead, the fullness of time is fully experienced in the moment of the now, from the passage through the moment of the now. So when we start with the present, we are lighting up that first true touch point, and we are understanding, we are living in the truth of the inevitability of expansion. And union is a natural state, and there is nothing but a return to that. And we are always on the way to that radiant expansion within all things. So I hope I'm explaining this well. So future fulfillment can only come from the moment of now. So there's this idea also of seeing all things as eternal, not seeing them time-bound, not seeing everything so defined and delineated. Because when we do that, there's no room, there's no space for grace. And so this is about creating a space for grace. And interestingly, that's the first of the C doodles, Soul Essence Art Sacred Partner doodles that I did was called A Space for Grace. And, so this idea of being able to see ourselves and all of life and one another through these eyes that see the eternal true nature of individuals and of humanity as a whole. And this is so opposed to how we move through life, isn't it? It's like we are so accustomed to parameters, aren't we? We're so accustomed to slicing and dicing and, like serving things up and packaging and labeling. And it's just how we have, for these millennia, approached life. And so from the book, Sacred Partnership book, there's a passage that says, "The future begins now. The future unfolds as we find unity through understanding radiant expansion." It's an acronym. Future, finding unity through radiant expansion, through understanding radiant expansion. And this understanding of radiant expansion, this awareness of what that truly is, comes through the full awareness of an experience of union and the allowance of it. And then there's some explanation of how that's a sacred union, and it happens from within for each individual. We cannot do it for each other. Union begins with you. Union begins with you. So the future unfolds as we find unity. How do we find unity? Through the understanding and experience of radiant expansion. And so this is really aligned also with the Future Map system, which is one of the 24 life systems that I talk about in my book, All Systems Go, with the solar systems, SOULAR, and those solar systems and how they are, again, like a map. I didn't call it a star map there, I don't think, but a solar map that kind of lights us up so that we are all systems go, because we are fully equipped for full thriving in this life. So that whole first realignment of the 5 realignments, the 5 true touch points, the first one is to start with the present, begin in the moment of now, and understand that any future fulfillment of any kind can only be accessed from the moment of now within the context of that field of grace. So that first true touch point gets activated when we stay present. Stay present, stay present. The second realignment or true touch point is to start with stillness. This is all about a single still point, and it's aligned with the concept of singularity. And from that, this multi-dimensional experience, this infinite expansion in all directions of time and space, and indeed beyond the bounds of time and space. And this happens within that soul matrix and within our connection to that soul matrix. More in that coming soon when I talk about, go back to the book I wrote in 2011, Cultivating Essence from the Matrix of Soul. But for now, let's just say that as we are rooted in the matrix of soul, not the matrix of 3D reality, the unreal world, as I used to call it. And so we become grounded and rooted in that matrix of soul. And really, that's about stillness. It's about returning to the still point of creation that exists within our whole self and our soul self within that seed point of the soul. And when we return to that place, that space, which is a space of grace within us, all things become possible. All manner of paths open up to you individually. And it does take, however, a measure of discipline and focus and strength to remain rooted in that soul matrix and to remain grounded in stillness. And there are many practices, meditation being one of the obvious ones, but prayer, journaling, nature, so many things that can help us and support us as we start with stillness and as we enter into that singularity as the avenue to radiant expansion. And so when we're able to enter into stillness, begin with stillness and that single still point within our soul, from there we are able to light up that second true touch point. And so the first two that we've discussed so far is to start with the present or start with now, and then to start with stillness or that single still point, single still point. The third realignment or true touch point is to start not with an assessment of the state of our union, whether that's the union within us, the union with another, the union, state of our union as a nation. I'm in the United States of America, and every year we have a State of the Union address, and not to assess the state of our union within, the state of our union with another, the state of our union as a nation, or the state of a society, not merely to start with that. It's not to say that assessing that isn't valuable, but rather this realignment that needs to happen so that we can experience radiant expansion is that we must start with the unified field itself. My hair is just like in my face. To start with the unified field itself. Okay, so here, note, I need a translator for this part because I don't understand all of this. I am hoping somebody out there does. If you do, send me a note. I have my comments open, so definitely reach out through my website, dawnrichardson.com, or a message to me. But this idea here had to do with beginning with the unified field. And as I understand it, they were showing me something about unified field theory. And that is aligned somehow with the idea of core dynamics that I write about in All Systems Go. So like I talk about these dynamic and sustainable solar systems, and I also call them life systems that are, sort of the ramping up to an all systems go life where we understand the light and the life and the love that we are. And so when we begin with a unified field, again, it's sort of similar to that field of grace. When we start with the unified field itself, rather than an assessment of the state of any one dynamic or parallel, I was shown it as, or relationship within that field, then we're placing the locus of control in the field itself, and thereby, as I was understanding it from Yeshua, thereby we are naturally restored to a state of harmony and balance with one another without us having to do anything to fix anything at all. So it was the way I was seeing it was just like amazing. Like it was sort of like that it's all there and that there's not really a lot of work that must be done. From the book, the Sacred Partnership book, there's a passage that says this: look for what unites us with another, rather than drawing distinctions that further divide and pit one thing against another. This is not an invitation to ignore any gaps that may exist. Rather, as we have discussed previously, we embrace seeming divisions and step into that gap, reorienting ourselves to the offering of our whole hearts to the God of creation and recreation. So notice, we're not stepping into the gap and focusing on the gap or focusing on that dynamic, that gap that we see between us and another, and trying to close. We're not trying to close the gap. We're not trying to fill it in. We're not trying to bury anything. We're not trying to make the ground level. We're not trying to do anything at all. We are stepping into the gap and looking for what unites us with everything in that unified field. And we are keeping the focus on the unified field itself. So there's definitely something more to be understood about this, because I was definitely seeing sort of that this way that this works within us, within these solar systems that I wrote about in All Systems Go, and the way is the same way it works apparently in with the planets and the stars, and how they are sustained as a dynamic and sustainable system within a unified field. There's also something about energy here and energetic resources, but I'm going to leave it at that. So that's this third realignment that must happen. We have to start with the unified field itself rather than our own assessment of the state of things as we are seeing them. Because when we start with that unified field, step into the gap, our perspective changes, number one, and then we look for all of the unifying qualities that may be energetic or may be physical, so they can be matter or energy, and we look for that, and we put the focus of our attention there as we are standing in that gap with love, being love, unified with love, because the love is what is sustaining us. It is who we are. It is who the other is. And we begin there. We begin with what unites us. So there's also this idea of like attracts like. And when we manage to adopt this way of kind of stepping into the gap while placing our attention or keeping our attention on what we hold in common, and that's not to ignore what is. It's just to, again, begin with the unified field. And when that happens, I was shown this like really amazing, like sort of we draw all things unto us. I think Jesus said that, didn't he? I have to look that up when he said that. We draw all things to us, and there is a natural, again, that natural restoration process that kicks in without us having to do anything. Back to that image in the beginning, right, of the atoms or the molecules naturally being drawn together to create. It's not fixed. So there are solid bonds that are formed, but they're not usually rigid, and they can rearrange themselves. And the resonance and the frequencies are what allows for that sustaining life force energy to flow in us, within us, between us, among us. And it is the fuel is love, and that love elevates all things, and all things that rise converge, and yet not merge into some blobby thing. Instead, it's the radiance, the experience of radiance comes from the individual rays of light that emanate from within us, and there are many multidimensional and multifaceted rays of light, and then how each one of us does that uniquely. No two stars are alike. So that is one other thing from the book. I really loved this passage too from the Sacred Partnership book. It said, "Nothing is impossible when we receive our true inheritance as bringers of the Christ light. When we set that light high upon a hill, first within our hearts, where we gather up all our concerns about the state of our union, and then alongside our partner's light, joined with the blessed star that comes from afar to join it, life's mystery begins its work within us." So this is the true touch point, number 3, that happens as we align ourselves, that realignment that happens when we start with the unified field itself rather than our assessment of something particular within that unified field. And so this true touch point number 3 is lit up. So true touch point number 4 happens when we undergo this. They're sort of like initiations, but I like the idea of realignment, because the way that I was shown it visually was literally like just sort of a click, click, click in place. The star map lights up, and then there's this rapid, collapse into the point of singularity, and this expansion that happens, and when it happens in one, it ignites another, and there's this natural experience of radiant expansion. So the fourth realignment is to start by being a body in motion. The radiance created by our choice to enter into the dance of life rises up and forms a flame between the dancers, who then become the dance. I think there's a Rumi quote like that, but anyway, that's from the book also. And so let me say that again. So because we choose to enter into the dance of our life, so to be in that fluid state, to choose simple elegance, to exist and reside within a space for grace, that field of grace, and to choose to begin there. Because of that choice to enter into the dance of our life, to be the dancer, then a flame forms within us first, and then between us and any other dancer in life, and that can be an individual or a group or society itself, groups within society, so it's not just limited to individuals. The flame rises up between the two. And, you can think of that as the third thing, back to that first video on the Trinitarian path. And between the dancers, there is a flame that forms, and the dancers themselves become the dance. So there's a continual cycle of life that's happening, and it's a giving and receiving, a cycle of giving and receiving. It's ever in flux and in flow. So to experience that, we have to be willing to be a body in motion. So what does that mean? It means we can't fix ourselves to a false circumference. We can't limit the field in which we exist to something much smaller and more diminished than what we are meant to experience. So it's, beginning with that unified field of grace, and to see the infinite, not only the infinite potential, because many of us can see that, but also to experience, to feel the infinite flow of life within us, from us, through us. And so this realignment as we start by being a body in motion, it is about physical motion, but it's more than physical motion. It is to allow for that flow. So it's creating that space and existing within that field of grace, being a body in motion. And as we realign ourselves to this way of moving through the world, of being in motion, and release our grip and our control and our fear and our terror of where it's all going, and no, we're going to flow out into nothingness. As we release that and allow ourselves to be the body in motion, we begin to move in right revolution, and there is a consistency that is created, that is itself a creative force. And again, we become the dancer, and then we become in relationship to the other stars and planets, or other dancers in this life, other players on the stage, if you will. Then we all become the dance, the one play of light I talk about a lot. And this radiance is created naturally, because when we enter into that realignment, that true touch point of becoming the dance itself is activated. So that's the fourth of the 5 stars on the star map. And the fifth realignment is to start with the star of wonder you are. So STAR is an acronym I use for your soul's truth and radiance. So that was the first connection that I believe was being made here when I was given this one. It was so interesting to me, though, that the terminology there that was given was Star of Wonder. And so recently, as some of you may be aware, I did this 2 video series on the passage to a new society and the 12 diamond dimensions and the activation of those in the next 7 years. And the first part of that, before the seven years of 2020 through 2026, the first part of that was this activation that happened during the month of August that we've just come through, specifically during the Lionsgate portal. But this year was interesting because I really think there was something to the 20th, August 20th, 2020. And so it was like a prolonged period of activation. But in any case, this Star of Wonder, I wrote about the fact that the foundation, the Star of Wonder, from a Star of Wonder that came from this, you have to see my drawing for this to make sense, but like this sort of portal, doorway, gateway, activation point that is 2020, the Star of Wonder emerged, and from the Star of Wonder, or within the Star of Wonder, were 5 wheels in a wheel that were activated, one right after the other, all now in motion. And these 5 wheels in a wheel will continue to spin in motion for the next 7 years. And you can learn a lot more about that in the free video series that are on my Dawn Richardson YouTube channel. You can find them there. They're under Life Collective is the heading you want to look for in terms of the playlists. And you can also download from my website, dawnrichardson.com, you can download the magazine, the online magazine that I was asked to put together with all of the symbols for each and the themes for each year and how that correlates or corresponds to what we will be looking at societally during those years. So for example, 2020 is about faith and foundations, believe it or not, and are building the nest. So the Star of Wonder imagery was just like fascinating for me for this 5th, the final activation of this true touch point that is going to allow for the experience of radiant expansion. So start with the Star of Wonder you are. So start with your soul's truth and radiance, and enter into the beauty and wonder that is there. And so to enter into it, you have to believe that it is possible. Maybe not. I guess you could. Yeah, I don't know. That gets into another discussion, so I won't go down that road right now. But let's just say that as we, so let's ask this question: how does beginning with the Star of Wonder in our individual lives, how does that lead us to the experience of radiant expansion and a life of full thriving? Let me read this passage from Sacred Partnership from the book. It says this: as we allow ourselves to be transformed and lifted up to new life, we naturally bring a higher love into all our relationships. Thus, the ways in which we are connected naturally come closer to a state of purity and innocence, as we were before we began to believe we were irretrievably broken and bound by sin. As we come to life again and again, and as we are revived and rejuvenated, born again to the wonder of who we are, as we connect to our soul's star and see the beautiful lines that connect our one star, our soul's truth and radiance, to another's starlight wonder. So this idea of starlight wonder was so beautiful. And I was shown how it's, again, that return to our natural state of purity and innocence and wholeness, that we've made that journey, or are making always that journey back to sacred wholeness, being restored to our true state, individually and collectively as humanity. And so as that begins to happen more and more, and as each and every one of us embraces our soul's truth and radiance and steps into that gap within to be the embodiment of our soul's highest, truest, deepest knowing of who we are individually and collectively, as we step into that space and begin to light up from within, it's that vibration lifts, right? And we begin to naturally see another's starlight wonder. And as we look upon others and see beauty and grace and innocence and purity, regardless of what that individual or the collective has been engaged in, again, this is not to say that there does not need to be accountability. Accountability is essential. But as we see with new eyes, and as we begin to experience that starlight wonder of who we are and who the other is, there is a natural lifting up. I love the way that is said here. We allow ourselves, by connecting to our soul's truth and radiance, our star power within, as we do that, we are allowing ourselves to be transformed. And I was shown too, there's a transfiguration. I talked about that in a video about a year ago, a transfiguration that is occurring within us, a reconfiguration, a reboot. And this is happening now collectively as well. And as we allow ourselves individually and collectively to be transformed, we are lifted up to new life. We're raised, elevated, and naturally bring a higher love into everything. And as that happens, we come closer to that original state, to Eden, to a new earth, to a new heaven and a new earth, and to that state of purity and innocence, restored. All things are restored and lifted up. And this is that last final true touch point of the 5 realignments that allow for the lighting up of that star map. And so as we enter into these realignments on a day-to-day basis, over and over and over again, and we begin to, again, refine our movement and to choose simple elegance, then that star map is lit up and we see one another in that starlight wonder and the beauty and the innocence and the purity of who we are and the wholeness of who we are together. Can you imagine if we all saw the wholeness of who we are together? If we saw the world as beautiful again, as filled with wonder and mystery and a gift that is an eternal gift, an everlasting, a gift of everlasting love. The fountain of youth, right? It comes from this experience that we choose to step into the gap that we perceive within, and suddenly we are connected to our soul's truth and radiance and naturally experience that radiance bursting out through us. We see it comes through our eyes because it changes how we see the world, and we embrace naturally and gracefully. In that field of grace, we embrace a whole new way of seeing ourselves and others and the world around us, a whole new way of being ourselves, a whole new way of freeing ourselves. And we are restored to our natural state of freedom, freedom for humanity, liberation for all, a doing away with all that has tainted and all that we have chosen to see mirrored outside of ourselves because we couldn't, couldn't or wouldn't or didn't have this awareness of what radiant expansion truly is, and that it is the gift of God, the gift of grace, the gift of life. It is that fountain of youth is naturally ours. That new heaven and that new earth are here for us now, and to step into it, all it takes is this realignment. And in this 5th one, we're talking about a realignment to the star of wonder you are. So I'm interested and intrigued by that particular choice of the image that was given to me, also because of what I mentioned about what I was shown about the next 7 years. And I'm wondering if perhaps that star of wonder and that the 5 wheels within the wheel that's happening externally in our world in these 7 years, I'm wondering if perhaps those 5 wheels within a wheel have been set spinning within us, and now there is a enhanced capacity for radiant expansion and that experience in every day for each one of us, and for that to now enter into our experience of sacred partnerships, sacred unions with another and with life itself. That union with life, I feel like there's something there, and that the 5 wheels in a wheel and the star of wonder that have been activated and will remain activated, as I understand it, forever, but most definitely for these 7 years, then, I think it's going to make it easier for us to see the beautiful lines that connect our soul's star, our soul's truth and radiance, to the star of wonder reflected back to us in another. And we see that when we choose to see through the eyes of love, when we choose to walk in the way of wholeness. That's the second of the 7 core teachings. When we choose to begin with that Trinitarian path and that understanding of the dynamic nature of life in the 3-star system, that makes me happy. It reminds me of my star home which I'm always, recently brought back to the fact that that's actually within me, right? I always think of it as far, far away in a galaxy far, far away, but it's here, it's now. So an aside here is that the power of creating our reality is not to be minimized. So there's a section in the Sacred Partnership book that really stands out for me, and it's a passage that really makes it clear that the restoration to right relationship and outer harmony is not at all dependent on what another person or collective chooses. Hear that again, okay? Because I think it's really critical. The restoration to right relationship is not at all dependent upon what another person, group, or system chooses, or what they believe, what beliefs they are entrenched in, or what they are espousing, or what they are projecting onto you, or what they are telling you is. This is so beautiful. Okay, stay with me for a second. So, in other words, the other person could not even recognize their own starlight wonder. They actually could be outright denying it. They could be seeing themselves and you and the world and life as a doomed, place of darkness. But still, the state of union, that homeostasis, that field of grace, that radiant expansion into that unified field is active nevertheless. And that union, the sacred union, is what is actually true. And how we know that is that these true touch points have been lit up and we are experiencing that radiant expansion. So that we are creating a reality in which we are expanded radiantly, and where anyone with eyes to see may receive that for themselves, because the more it is mirrored back and the more they can't sustain a reality that there's going to be dissonance there, and so that dissonance it creates a gap. Okay, and that gap is the opening. That gap is the gift when we step into it, or the other steps into it. That is the place from which we can enter into these realignments, light up that star map, connect to our soul's truth and radiance, and see that starlight wonder in another, and come to life and live in full expression. Experience radiant expansion from within fully. By living this way, we're creating that star map. And because we are in the process of aligning to this whole new way of beginning, that is actually a return to the light and the life and the love that we are, as we are in the process of realignment, these 5 realignments, we are activating those 5 true touch points. And as we're doing that, we're creating more radiant expansion, more of these little mini big bangs, and experiencing for ourselves the creation, being the creation, the recreation of the world, being that. As we're experiencing all of that, we're leading the way in love, and we're actually leaving a path back to life for all others who follow and who are now, who choose to enter into the moment of the now with us in any moment. That can change in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye. We will be changed, and we are changed, and this is the true teaching, the core teaching of radiant expansion. It can literally happen in a moment, in a shift in perspective, in a choice to reside within the field of grace, to create a space for grace, to see the starlight wonder in another, to connect to our soul's truth and radiance, and to focus our attention on the lines that connect us one to the other, beginning within one part of us to the other parts of us, and then with other individuals and with groups and society as a whole. So there's I mentioned that passage. Let me read that to you from Sacred Partnership book. It says this. It says, the realization of a strong union within or with another begins in the present moment, and union can exist even where another would reject its very existence. We create future fulfillment from the moment that is here and now by seeing the state of any union as strong. So seeing our state of our union within, seeing the state of the union between us and another, seeing the state of the union of us to the collective, various groups within the collective, see that as strong and moving from strength to strength while also bringing loving attention to what is asking for expansion. Now, this is the part when there is the state of the union address or the state of the union where we're assessing in relationships. This is the part we miss. We miss the moving from strength to strength while also bringing loving attention to what is asking for expansion within the field of grace. So we don't go too narrow. We don't get fixated on the problem, the lack, the limitation, the gap, and try to fix that. We step into it. We see it for what it is. We remain focused on a whole new way of seeing through the eyes of love and seeing the starlight wonder within one another, and we sometimes we have to look for it, but seeing that and standing in that gap and bringing loving attention to what is asking for expansion without moving into, the book talks a lot about this, without moving into that sort of fixing, without rushing into solutions. So that's that's the old model. I don't know good words to use for that. But the book, that passage that ends with this, when we do all that, we lean into the promise that is ever unfolding, which brings us back to the field of grace and that broader perspective that the invitation is here for us to step into. We need to create. We don't need to. We are invited to create a space for grace by beginning with that unified field of existence, that field of grace. And we choose to remove our fixation, we choose to pull up the anchor where we have been fixated on the problem state. And rather, we choose to be in a body in motion and to embrace fluidity and flow, the flow of life, the river of life, to be one with that river, to allow it to move through us, to allow us to be moved by it as we are a body in motion. And as we do that and stop fixating on the problem state or the assessing mode, instead we be peace and we become love. And we are at peace. We are restored to natural balance and harmony within ourselves and eventually in time with one another. And we exist then within that field of infinite potential, which is a new heaven and a new earth. So to recap, there are the 5 realignments that are going to allow us to begin to make the shift where we are residing within that space for grace, within that field of grace. And these 5 realignments light up the star map, the true touch points. So the 5 realignments are: start with the present or with now. Number 2, start with stillness or that point of singularity. Number 3, start with the unified field itself rather than anything that exists within that field or any one dynamic. So rather than 2 points, you want to think of the whole field. Always begin with the whole field. Number 3, start with the unified field itself. Number 4, start with being a body in motion, in flow, with life. And number 5, start with the star of wonder you are and know your soul's truth and radiance and begin to celebrate life and celebrate your starlight wonder and to see it reflected back to you joyfully. And you're going to see it more and more and more. And, I know this because I have slipped in and out of this state many times. Many times. And when we know ourselves as radiant, and when we know and believe and trust that we are held in an infinite grace, then we know that we exist within that sphere of infinite grace, and we know that we ourselves are one with that unified field, and we are ever in motion. We are a body in motion. We are bringing forth from our soul's truth and radiance the experience of expansion, radiant expansion from within, and creating the world we wish to see by being who we truly are, the light and the life and the love we are at our core.